and to ink official treaties, but for some reason there were very few who wanted to speak with him, most opting instead to wait for Gnat le Fin. But things could not go on like this for much longer. All the esteemed faction heads in the large hall were growing steadily more impatient with the Kung's absence, and Viceroy Gerd Kloster-Dyksch could sense that. The important Geckho had already dipped out of the big room several times to ask his assistants about it, but they just threw up their paws because there had not been any news about the Kung of Earth. Finally, when yet another transmission came into his headset, the furry Viceroy lit up and made an announcement for all to hear. In the Geckho man's words, the frigate Tamara the Paladin and a relic faction corvette escort group had just touched down in the nearby spaceport, and Gnat would be making his overdue appearance any minute. Gerd Kloster-Dyksch pointed his clawed paw at a huge round table in the middle of the room and told the guests to take their seats. And that was where the first problem started. Representatives of the hostile 4th and 8th directories of the Majorcratic world refused to sit next to each other. The heads of the large Human 3 and Human 12 factions from the other world, meanwhile, hissed at each other and nearly got into a fistfight before the Viceroy's security broke them up. Gert Macpeo, the mage diviner, had seen a report that in their alternate world there was tension between their two large states, which threatened to spill over into a large-scale war. Earth's very existence was on the line. This was no time for petty squabbles. "Hey, why does the Relict faction get a whole 4 representatives at the assembly, while all the other Earth factions only get 2? It isn't fair." The peevish voice belonged to a balding level 28 diplomat from the Human 27 faction named Arjan Muhlenbelt, who had just then realized that 4 seats had been allocated to the Relic faction delegation. The chief advisor even had to bring up the invitation list on his tablet so he could remember who the man was. Ah, yes, H27. A small commercial faction from Europe, providing extremely well-heeled citizens the chance to cure any illness through the game that bends reality. The faction had existed in the game for just 2 months and controlled 3 nodes in the southern part of the large continent of the virtual Earth, 2 of which it had purchased from neighboring states. That meant they must have had funds in the game as well. On the other hand, the Human 27 faction was considered very young and weak, so they weren't subject to the Army of Earth's military draft. While Gerd Macpeo tried to figure out if it was even worth responding to such an insignificant faction, Princess Minna le Fin stepped in. "Perhaps because the Relic faction has members from both alternate worlds, 1 expert from each version of Earth to cover all our bases, plus a diplomat, plus the faction head. That makes 4. But the European diplomat was not satisfied by that answer and continued to press, seemingly intent on provoking a conflict. "After my talks with your chief advisor, I came to the conclusion that Gerd Macpeo is not particularly familiar with events in my homeworld. He must be your delegation's Majorcratic world specialist. So, Princess Minnow, which one of your faction's 4 representatives does that make you? You are certainly no diplomat, and obviously not faction head." The people representing Majorcratic world factions started buzzing in dismay, because the European diplomat's conduct had crossed the line. Commoners without magic abilities had no right to treat a mage ruler so brutishly. The huge head of the second directory, Lang Uitaka, even jumped out of his seat, preparing to intercede on the princess's behalf, but the accomplished general's assistance proved unnecessary. "Minnow is my wife, and that is reason enough for her to attend this assembly." All sounds and discussions in the room instantly fell silent, while many attendees stood to greet the Kung of Earth with respect. Wearing his matte black Devour armor, Gnat entered the hall accompanied by Relic faction diplomat Lang Thomas Mueller, as well as his personal bodyguard Gerd Imran, and Myelonian personal assistant Gerd... Whoa! The chief advisor's eyes went wide with surprise. Lang Ani Urimayayu. How could that be? "I had a very good reason for arriving late to this assembly, and I will get to it soon. But first, we have to settle the biggest issue. 3 Kungs in one room is clearly too many." The Devourer glanced at his bodyguard, and suddenly appeared on the exact opposite end of the large hall, behind a standing middle-aged woman with dark hair. He tried to seize her, but her body suddenly turned into semi-transparent jelly, hissed, and gave a burbling sound. "Damn, got away." Nat's peeved blue eyes flickered with electric rage, and not just figuratively. Nat turned to the man standing next to where the woman just was, a gray-haired mage ruler.